The last firewall should have locked Zahara Cole out. Every monitor in her apartment went black. A system she had never seen before addressed her by a name she had buried 6 years earlier. 40 minutes later, men from one of Tokyo's most feared criminal organizations were standing inside her building. The strange part was not that they had found her. What was odd was that their network had been waiting for her before she arrived. A streaming prompt blinked on an open window, asking viewers where they were watching. Zahara pulled the network cable from her workstation before the message could change. "Welcome back, Nightingale." The words remained on the dead screen. That was impossible. Nightingale had never been a public alias. It had been an internal designation attached to a resilience architecture she had designed while working for Asterion Grid in London. 6 years earlier, the project had ended with an internal investigation and her clearance revoked. Her name had been attached to a failure she had never been allowed to properly examine. Asterion had told her the architecture was destroyed. Yet 3 nights ago, while tracing an encrypted transaction cluster for a private client, Zahara had seen a recovery sequence she recognized immediately. Her sequence. She had followed it from London-hosted mirrors to Singapore routing infrastructure, then into servers registered through a Japanese maritime company called Shigemori Holdings. She had expected stolen intellectual property. She had not expected recognition. Her phone lost signal. Then the intercom downstairs rang once. Zahara did not answer. She closed the encrypted drive containing her session logs and slipped it into the inner pocket of her jacket. By the time she reached the apartment door, someone knocked. 3 measured strikes. No shouting. No police identification. She opened the door because pretending she was not home would buy her nothing. 2 Japanese men stood outside. Both wore dark business coats. Neither displayed a weapon. The older one inclined his head. "Ms. Cole." Not a question. Behind them, the hallway camera had been turned toward the wall. Zahara looked at it, then back at him. "That's expensive access for a shipping company?" His expression did not change. "Mr. Shigemori would like to speak with you. About you already know." She almost smiled. "No. I know what I found. That isn't the same thing." 20 minutes later, she was sitting in the rear of a sedan, crossing central Tokyo. Her laptop bag was on the seat opposite her, and one of the men beside it. No one had handcuffed her. That mattered. It meant they wanted cooperation, or they wanted her calm enough to give them what force couldn't extract. The Shigemori headquarters occupied the upper floors of a glass tower overlooking the harbor. The lobby looked less like a criminal front than the headquarters of any multinational logistics firm. Polished stone quiet security employees wearing access badges. Zahara noticed 3 different security systems before the elevator doors closed. The 4th had no visible reader. Interesting. She was taken to a conference room high above the port. Kaito Shigemori stood near the windows, reading something on a tablet. 39, dark suit, no tie. He did not perform intimidation for her benefit. When Zahara entered, he finished the paragraph before setting the device down. 12 minutes, he said. She sat without being invited. 11 minutes and 47 seconds. His attention sharpened. That's how long you were inside. That's how long your system thinks I was inside. A second man near the table gave her a disapproving look. Broader than Kaito, older by perhaps 5 years, with the posture of someone accustomed to turning instructions into action. Tetsuo Arima. Zahara had seen his name attached to Shigemori security subsidiaries during her research. Kaito took the chair opposite her. "What did you take?" "Nothing. You crossed 5 protected layers." "Yes, and took nothing. I was looking for something." "What, my work?" That answer produced the first pause. Zahara opened her laptop, but Arima put a hand over the lid before she could wake it. "That stays closed." She looked at his hand. then at him. If you believed that laptop was the dangerous part, you wouldn't have brought it into the building. Arima removed his hand slowly. Kaito said, "Explain." "I found proprietary architecture inside your network, code written for Asterion Grid 6 years ago. We licensed systems from Asterion. Then Asterion sold you something it told me had been destroyed." Kaito watched her for several seconds. He did not look surprised enough. That bothered her more than disbelief would have. Arima spoke before him. "She is buying time." He turned toward one of the security staff. "Disconnect everything she brought. No external devices, no wireless interfaces. Isolate her phone and computer." Zahara looked at him. "Don't." Arima barely acknowledged her. It was an understandable decision from his perspective. A hostile operator had breached infrastructure tied to money and shipping. Internal communications were at risk. Remove her tools, eliminate persistence, restore control. It was also wrong. The guard took her laptop and phone from the room. Zahara counted silently. 7 seconds. 12. At 19, Arima's phone vibrated. He checked it, then another device on the table chimed. Kaito's tablet displayed a red notification. Arima answered his phone in Japanese, listened, and stood straighter. A second call arrived before he ended the first. Kaito picked up his tablet. "What happened?" Arima did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. Kaito turned the screen toward Zahara. 3 payment channels had gone offline simultaneously. One served offshore settlement accounts Zahara assumed were not meant for auditors. The other 2 were legitimate corporate systems. She saw a payroll flag among the failures. "How many employees are attached to that queue?" she asked. Kaito studied her. "Why, because if the processing window closes your dock, crews don't get paid on schedule." Arima said, "You did this." "No, you warned us before it happened. I warned you because I recognized the architecture." He leaned over the table. "Restore it. I can try." "You will." Zahara met his gaze. "If I caused the shutdown, threatening me might help. If your own system caused it, threatening me, waste the processing window." Kaito raised one hand. Arima stopped. Not happily. Kaito asked, "What do you need, my computer? Connected exactly as it was." Arima objected immediately. Kaito looked at him once. The laptop returned. Zahara opened it. The network map had changed. 3 nodes were inaccessible. A 4th was cycling through a continuity protocol she remembered designing years ago, though not in this configuration. Someone had altered Nightingale extensively. She worked for 6 minutes. Arima watched every command. Kaito watched her. "Can you restore all of it?" "Yes." "Then do it." "No." Arima moved toward her. Kaito did not. Zahara pointed to the payroll route. "I'm restoring this one. You don't choose which parts of my network function. At the moment, apparently, I do." That landed badly with Arima. Kaito ignored the provocation. "Why? Payroll. Because those employees didn't choose your war?" She entered the recovery sequence. The payroll channel stabilized. Across the room, one of the security analysts confirmed the queue had resumed. The other 2 channels remained frozen. Kaito looked from the screen to Zahara. He was reassessing the woman his organization had collected from an apartment less than an hour earlier. She had entered his system. His people had removed her access. And somehow, their infrastructure had punished them for that attempt. "Why does it respond to you?" he asked. "I don't know." For the first time that evening, Zahara meant it completely. She opened the permissions tree. Ordinary administrator accounts sat beneath multiple governance layers. Shigemori credentials appeared throughout the hierarchy. Kaito's name was there, but not at the top. Above every active authority sat a dormant designation. She had not seen that since her final weeks at Asterion. Original architect. Her certificate fingerprint appeared beside it. Zahara stared at the screen. 6 years ago, Asterion had told her Nightingale no longer existed. Now, a Yakuza-linked financial network in Tokyo recognized her as part of its highest trust structure. She turned the laptop toward Kaito. His eyes settled on the designation. He understood enough. Zahara did not ask who had stolen her code. That question had become too small. She asked, "Why does your empire think I belong inside it?" Kaito did not answer Zahara's question immediately. Instead, he asked for the acquisition archive. Arima remained in the room. 2 legal staff pulled historical records from an internal repository that had not been touched in years. Zahara kept her laptop open, but disconnected from the deeper network. The payroll route was still functioning. The other frozen channels remained locked. That gave her leverage. It also made her responsible for what happened next. A file appeared on the conference display. Asterian Grid Resilience System Acquisition. Zahara stood. The contract date was 6 years old. The purchaser was Shigemori Maritime Holdings. The seller was Asterian Grid. The architecture was listed under a corporate product code she remembered. Her name did not appear anywhere. Kaito scrolled through the signatures. Our company paid for it. I can see that. You said it was stolen. I said Asterian told me it had been destroyed. That is different. Yes, the correction cost her nothing. She made it anyway, Kaito noticed. He opened another page. Asterian had warranted full ownership of the underlying code. Zahara read the language twice. There it was. A clause transferred all rights to a recovery architecture developed under internal classification. The wording was legal. The wording was clean. The wording was false. They sold it after removing me from the project, she said. Arima asked, why would they remove the person who built it? That was the question I spent 6 years asking. Kaito looked at her. He did not ask for the whole story. Not yet. Not yet. That restraint was useful. Zahara returned to the permissions tree. She began comparing the current architecture to what she remembered building. The first differences were minor. Then they stopped being minor. A recovery system should have monitored continuity privilege, escalation data, integrity, and failover. This one did all of that. It also ranked authority. Zahara opened a governance table. What is this? Kaito moved closer. Rows of names appeared beside debt classifications, voting status, and succession eligibility. He read one. That controls internal authorization. For servers. For people. Zahara looked at him. Kaito continued. Certain decisions require recognized standing. And your software decides who has that standing, it records it. No. She opened the version history. Someone made it decide. She highlighted a rule set added 4 years earlier. A member whose debt status crossed a certain threshold automatically lost voting privileges. Another rule transferred authorization when a financial obligation changed hands. A third altered succession eligibility if the system classified a person as compromised. Kaito read them without interrupting. These are council rules, he said. Show me the original documents. Legal staff began searching. They found some. Not all. Several digital rules had no matching written resolution. Zahara leaned back. So either your council forgot to document its own laws, or the system acquired laws the council never approved. That was the first time Kaito completed her thought. The distinction mattered. He was no longer asking whether she had damaged his network. He was asking what his network had done to him. Arima rejected the conclusion. You are trusting the person who breached us. Kaito said, I am reading the same screen you are. That screen is hers. No, Zahara said. That's the problem. She pointed toward the architecture map. It stopped being mine years ago. A name appeared in an older transaction cluster, Hideo Matsura. Kaito's attention fixed on it. Zahara noticed. Who is he? Someone who stole from us. Maybe. Arima turned toward her. There is no maybe. Zahara ignored him. Matsura's record showed a sequence of unauthorized transfers from an internal fund into a controlled shell company. The transfers had been the basis for his removal. The timestamps looked consistent. The audit chain did not. One signature referenced a certificate that had not existed on the date of the transaction. Zahara opened the earlier system state. The transaction disappeared. She opened the next state, still absent. Then months later, it appeared retroactively. There. Kaito stepped closer. Explain. This record wasn't created when the transaction supposedly happened. She expanded the metadata. It was inserted later. Arima said, "That proves nothing about Matsura. It proves the evidence used against him changed after the fact." Kaito read the screen for a long time. Then, he asked legal staff to retrieve the original disciplinary file. The file matched the altered digital record exactly. Zahara understood before anyone said it. The accusation had not merely existed inside the system. People had acted on it. "What happened to him?" she asked. Kaito answered. "He lost his position. Anything else, his contracts were dissolved. His voting status was removed. 2 businesses under his control were reassigned." Zahara looked at the rule set again. A false transaction had moved through the system and changed a man's entire place inside the organization. Kaito ordered Matsura contacted. Arima objected. "You want to reopen this now?" "Yes, because she found inconsistent metadata, because we punished a man using evidence that may have been manufactured." Arima lowered his voice. "Correcting this publicly makes you look as if you cannot control your own house." Kaito looked at the disciplinary record. "Then I should have controlled it better. That choice cost him before Matsura even arrived." Within an hour, 2 senior captains were calling. They asked why a settled judgment was being reconsidered. One used the word weakness. Kaito took both calls himself. He did not blame Zahara. He did not hide behind technical uncertainty. He said the evidence had been compromised and the decision would be reviewed. Zahara listened from across the room. She had known executives who buried smaller mistakes for less. That did not make Kaito safe. It made him harder to pin down. Matsura joined by encrypted video rather than coming to the building. He was older, skeptical, and visibly uninterested in reconciliation. Zahara walked him through the forged chain. He asked only one question. "Can you prove it?" "Yes." Kaito spoke next. "The judgment against you is suspended effective now." Matsura stared at him. "Suspended until the council votes to restore your status. You were the one who removed me." "Yes." No justification, no speech. Matsura ended the call shortly afterward. Arima left the room without asking permission. Kaito watched the door close. "There will be consequences." "There already are," Zahara said. "Do you think I should have buried it? I think most men in your position would." "That was not my question." She considered him. "No." It was about as close to agreement as they'd gotten. Later, another alert appeared. A secondary payroll server had begun cycling because of the earlier isolation event. Zahara immediately returned to the console. Kaito said, "Leave it. Why? We have larger problems. Those employees still need to be paid." She spent 20 minutes stabilizing it. Kaito did not interrupt again. When she finished, a man she had not met entered carrying old acquisition files. Masanori Kanda introduced himself as Shigemori's chief legal strategist. He was courteous, precise, and familiar with Asterian terminology in a way Zahara noticed immediately. He placed the records beside her. "I understand you reached the original architecture?" "Parts of it." Kanda glanced at the open permission tree. "Did you reach the root?" Zahara looked at him. It was an unusually specific question for a lawyer. "Not yet." Kanda nodded once. "Then perhaps we are fortunate." He left before she could ask what he meant. Zahara returned to the architecture. The corrupted records extended deeper than Matsura's case. The oldest inaccessible section sat behind a separate authorization layer. Founder's ledger. She tried her certificate. Rejected. Kaito tried his succession credentials. Rejected. Then the system displayed the requirement. 2 authorities. Original architect certificate, Shigemori succession token. Zahara read it twice. Kaito stood beside her. Neither spoke for several seconds. Opening the ledger would require her to activate the identity. That identity could permanently connect her to the system. It would require him to hand her access. That access would be tied directly to the legitimacy of his leadership. They had spent the night proving that records could destroy people. Now the truth was locked behind credentials that could destroy both of them. Zahara closed the access window. "We don't open that until we understand what we're giving each other." Kaito did not argue. That was the moment things between them shifted, not into trust, into the possibility of it. And somewhere inside the network, the founder's ledger remained closed, holding the answer to a question neither of them could now investigate alone. Zahara did not activate her certificate that night. Kaito did not offer his succession token either. For the next 6 hours, they worked around the founder's ledger instead of through it. They tested the limits of every adjacent system and reconstructed what they could from secondary records. That decision bought them time. It also made the shape of the problem clearer. The deeper they went, the more Zahara saw evidence of layered authority she had never designed. Permissions had been added in ways that looked administrative rather than malicious. A voting restriction here, a debt reclassification there, a succession clause hidden behind compliance language. No single change looked dramatic. Together, they formed a second government beneath the visible one. At dawn, Kaito sent everyone except Arima out of the conference room. "You need sleep," he told Zahara. "I need the original implementation logs. They're in restricted storage. Then unrestrict them. That archive includes internal financial history." She looked at him. "And you invited me into this because I did not invite you. Your system seems to disagree." Arima made a quiet sound of irritation. Kaito ignored him. "You keep treating access as neutral," he said. "It isn't. Neither is withholding it. That archive contains people's lives, and your current system contains decisions about those lives that may already be false." Neither moved. The disagreement was not about data. It was about control. Kaito finally authorized a limited archive release. Zahara gained the records she needed. 3 senior captains received alerts that Kaito had expanded an outsider's access to protected governance material. By breakfast, one of them had formally requested an internal review. Kaito fixed one hole and opened another. Zahara saw the notification appear on his tablet. "You knew that would happen." "Yes, and you did it anyway." "Yes." She studied him for a moment. "That's either trust or bad judgment. Those are not always different things." For the first time, she almost laughed. The archive provided the next piece. The original Nightingale deployment had been signed off through Asterian's legal division, but one attachment contained language Zahara remembered because she had argued against it years earlier. Unilateral Recovery Authority. She had refused to include it. Her design required distributed verification. No single administrator could rewrite critical ownership history without leaving recoverable evidence. Yet, someone had later rebuilt parts of the system around exactly that kind of authority. Kaito read the annotation beside the clause. "You wrote this objection?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I had already seen what happens when institutions control both the decision and the record of the decision." He waited. This time, Zahara continued. "When Asterian accused me of mishandling the project, I challenged the internal report. Every appeal went back through their own systems, their logs, their compliance team, their review board, and they all agreed with each other. They all relied on the same record." Kaito looked at the screen again. "So you built Nightingale to prevent that?" "I built it so the person with the most authority couldn't become the person who defined reality." He leaned back. "That sounds personal." "It became personal after I learned how easily a system can make a lie look official." Kaito did not offer sympathy. She was grateful for that. Instead, he said, "My father moved us into systems like this for the opposite reason." She looked at him. He thought rules would reduce arbitrary decisions, fewer personal punishments, fewer favors, less dependence on which captain happened to be strongest in the room, and did it? For a while, the admission mattered. Kaito had not digitized the organization because he worshipped control. He had done it because he believed structure could restrain people. Zahara had built structure because she believed people must be able to restrain structure. They had approached the same problem from opposite directions. That was why working together was becoming dangerous. Not because either trusted easily, because they were starting to understand each other well enough to predict choices. The first warning came just before noon. Shigemori Maritime lost access to 2 internal treasury accounts. Then, 3 shipping authorizations were suspended. Arima entered carrying a printed governance notice. Emergency protocol. Kaito took it. Zahara read over his shoulder. The document cited unauthorized access, compromised succession credentials, and irregular movement of organizational assets. Who triggered it? She asked. Arima answered. Kanda. The name hit differently now. Kaito read the full notice. As chief legal strategist, Masanori Kanda had authority to invoke temporary governance protections if the organization's succession structure appeared compromised. On paper, the action was reasonable. That was what made it effective. Zahara opened the financial records attached to the accusation. Transfers made Kaito look as though he had been moving assets into personally controlled entities during her breach. They're constructed, she said. Can you prove it? Not yet. Kaito called 2 port directors and ordered critical cargo operations maintained manually for 24 hours. The shipping delays eased. The political damage did not. Within minutes, Zahara saw internal messages accusing him of bypassing formal controls through personal loyalty. She pointed at the screen. You fixed the logistics. I can see the rest. You also proved their argument. That I still have influence. That your influence exists outside the rules when you need it. Kaito looked at her. And if I had done nothing, workers lose shifts. Contracts fail. Suppliers get punished for a fight they didn't start. So there was no clean choice. No. He gave a small nod. Good. Now we understand each other. The words bothered her because he was right. Power could prevent damage. It could also become an excuse to preserve itself. An hour later, Kanda requested to see Zahara alone. Kaito refused. Zahara looked at him. No. His attention moved to her. I said he doesn't meet you alone, and I said no. He just froze half my governance structure, which is exactly why I need to hear what he wants. I can have someone present. That changes what he'll say. Kaito's voice lowered. You think independence means ignoring risk, and you think protection means deciding which risks I'm allowed to take. That ended the argument, not because he agreed, because he understood what continuing it would mean. Kanda met Zahara in a glass-walled office with no devices on the table. He placed a slim folder between them. Asterian internal correspondence. She did not touch it. What's in it? Proof that your dismissal was manufactured. For the first time in 6 years, the possibility of vindication finally felt within reach. Kanda watched her reaction carefully. You can have the full archive, in exchange for one technical confirmation. He slid a document across the table. It alleged Kaito Shigemori unlawfully interfered with Nightingale's governance architecture after Zahara's intrusion. You want me to authenticate this? I want you to tell the truth. I don't know if it's true. You know he expanded your access. You know he bypassed internal controls. That is not the same thing. Kanda folded his hands. You spent 6 years asking an institution to correct its own lie. I'm offering you the record that proves it. Zahara looked at the folder again. He knew exactly where to apply pressure, not to her fear, to her sense of justice. She stood. I won't sign incomplete evidence. Kanda did not stop her. Then ask yourself why Mr. Shigemori would want you to believe the evidence is incomplete. Back in the conference room, Kaito asked only one question. What did he offer my name back? Kaito understood. And what did he want you? He did not tell her she had made the right choice. He did not ask whether she would stay loyal. Instead, he said, if the evidence proves I did it, you should sign. That changed something between them more than any promise of protection could have. Zahara returned to Matsura's corrupted record. She compared its hidden signature to the new accusations attached to Kaito. The pattern matched, same sequence, same delayed insertion behavior. She traced it backward, past Matsura, past Kaito's leadership, past every known dispute in the organization. Then she found the first occurrence. 6 years earlier, the weak Nightingale was transferred from Asterion to Shigemori. Zahara stopped. Kaito came to the screen. "What is it?" She enlarged the timestamp. "The corruption didn't start with you." How far back to the beginning? The accusation against Kaito was not the start of a coup. It was the latest move in a system that had been altered before he ever inherited it. And the first trace of that alteration appeared in the same week Zahara Cole had been removed from Nightingale forever. By noon, Kanda had scheduled the succession vote. Not threatened it, scheduled it. That distinction mattered. The emergency governance protocol gave him enough procedural authority to claim Kaito's leadership had become unstable. Zahara's intrusion, the expanded archive access, the frozen accounts, the manually overridden shipping orders, all of it had been arranged into a sequence that looked less like a crisis response and more like proof of misconduct. The vote would take place that evening. If Nightingale certified the transition, Kaito would lose access to corporate systems. He would also lose the mechanisms that recognized his authority across the organization. No gunman had to remove him. The system could do it cleanly. Zahara stood beside the open Founder's Ledger prompt. Original Architect Certificate, Shigemori Succession Token. 2 authorities required. Kaito placed a small hardware key on the table. Black casing, no logo, his succession token. Zahara looked at it. "This is the part where you're supposed to hesitate. I already did. When last night." She reached into her jacket and removed an encrypted card no larger than her thumb. Her original certificate. 6 years ago, she had kept it because Asterion never asked for it back. At the time, she had assumed it was useless. Now, both objects sat between them. Enough to open the ledger, enough to compromise each other permanently. Kaito pushed his token toward her. "Use it. You understand what that gives me?" "Yes. You don't know me that well. I know what you did when Kanda offered you your career back." That was one decision. It was the one that mattered. Zahara looked at him for a second longer, then inserted both credentials. The Founder's Ledger opened. There were no dramatic files labeled conspiracy or betrayal. There were version histories. Thousands of them. Zahara began filtering. The architecture preserved old states in fragments, ownership tables, certificate changes, failed governance, rewrites. Something about the pattern bothered her. She narrowed the results to the earliest unauthorized modifications. The dates moved backward. Matsura, Kaito's succession period. Earlier captains, then Asterion deployment. A system log appeared from 6 years ago. Zahara read it once, then again. Wait. Kaito stepped closer. "What?" She opened the trigger sequence. A chain of security anomalies had begun 3 nights before her first intrusion attempt. Not after. Before. Her hand stopped over the keyboard. "That alert. The one from your apartment?" It wasn't early because the clocks were wrong. She opened another log. The firewall path she had followed in Chapter 1 appeared as a sequence of deliberate exception states. Not vulnerabilities. Invitations. Her own design language stared back at her. Recovery beacon. Architect recall condition. Zahara felt the past rearranging itself. Years earlier, while building Nightingale, she had included a safeguard against repeated, unauthorized changes to ownership history. If governance records were altered beyond a defined threshold, the system was designed to preserve evidence and create a recognizable anomaly. Not to email the architect. That would have been too easy to intercept. The anomaly was meant to attract the architect through the very behavior they would recognize. Kaito read her face. "You know what this is." "Yes." What she turned the screen toward him. "I didn't break into your system." He waited. Nightingale led me in. The strange firewall. The early alert. The message waiting on her screen. "Welcome back, Nightingale." They had treated all of it as evidence that the system recognized her after the intrusion. It had recognized her before she arrived. Kaito looked at the logs. So the system called you back. Yes. Why now? Zahara searched the trigger history. The threshold had not been crossed suddenly. It had been approached in increments. Small governance changes, controlled manipulation, years of them. Someone had been pushing the system toward recall without triggering it too early. She ran the administrator's signatures. One name kept appearing through the legal authorization proxies. Masanori Kanda. Kaito said nothing. Zahara kept going. A second pattern emerged. Kanda had known about the architect's safeguard. He had referenced its legal implications in deployment documents. That explained the question he asked in Chapter 2. Did you reach the root? He had never been asking how much she stole. He had been checking whether the system had delivered her far enough. Zahara sat back. He wanted me here. Kaito looked toward the conference room doors. Why? She found the answer inside the final succession rewrite. The pending transfer could not be permanently certified with Kaito's token alone. It required validation against the original architect authority. Her certificate. Kanda had spent years manipulating the governance structure until Nightingale called her back. Then he needed her to enter the system, to authenticate the final change. The crisis had not begun with her intrusion. Her intrusion had been part of the plan. Zahara opened the original Asterian acquisition package. One legal intermediary appeared in old correspondence. Kanda, not under Shigemori employment, as outside counsel. She kept reading. There were references to removing the architect from implementation control, Asterian compliance notes, a discussion of ownership objections, her objections. She found the phrase she had written 6 years earlier. No unilateral recovery authority should exist. Below it, Kanda's response architect involvement should terminate prior to transfer. Zahara stopped. The career she had spent 6 years trying to repair had not collapsed because she failed. She had been removed because the system she built refused to let one person control reality. Kanda wanted the architecture. He did not want her principal inside it. Kaito read the correspondence. He destroyed your career to get this, to get around this. She pointed to the distributed authority rules. And now, he needs me back, because he still can't finish without me. The vote began in 40 minutes. They had no time for outrage. Zahara exported the founder's ledger into a sealed verification environment. I can prove the records changed. Kaito asked, can you prove what they changed? He understood immediately. To her, it was technical. To him, it was a map of relationships. A voting restriction represented alliances. A succession adjustment represented years of internal leverage. Zahara reconstructed the cryptographic chain. Kaito sat beside her and identified consequences. This one removed Matsura. She tagged it. This one transferred voting weight from Osaka operations. Tagged. This one made 2 captains appear indebted to my father's office. Tagged. This one broke a succession block. Together, the abstract pattern became a history of engineered power. Zahara could prove the records were false. Kaito could prove what the false records had done. The council assembled remotely and in person. Kanda opened with procedure. He was calm because procedure was his battlefield. He presented the case against Kaito. Unauthorized access, compromised governance, improper intervention. Then Zahara entered the session. Kanda looked at her once. You agreed to certify yes. That answer made him relax. Zahara authenticated the founder's ledger record herself. The founder's ledger. The entire verification chain opened to the council. Kaito followed. He did not defend himself first. He walked them through each manipulated decision. Names, debts, votes, expulsions, years of altered outcomes. Matsura's case became the simplest example because everyone already knew it had been wrong. Then, the larger pattern became impossible to dismiss. Kanda attempted to invalidate Zahara's authority by calling her an external intruder. She answered by presenting the original architect certificate. The same authority his succession process required. He could not claim she lacked legitimacy without destroying his own mechanism. That was the trap he had built for himself. The vote stopped, but Kaito still had one choice left. They could preserve the system and delete the corrupted parts. They could remove Kanda and continue. Arima recommended exactly that. It can be repaired. Zahara looked at Kaito. She did not tell him what to do. This was his empire, his inheritance, his cost. Kaito looked at years of altered debt and manufactured legitimacy. He saw decisions made trustworthy because a machine had recorded them. Then he removed his succession token, dismantled the governance layer. Arima stared at him. That breaks half the organization. Yes, we lose authority. Yes. Kaito looked at Zahara. No one gets to own the record again. She executed the dismantling sequence. Access structures separated. Debt authority collapsed. Succession certification became invalid. Kanda's control disappeared with the architecture he had spent years corrupting. The audit package went simultaneously to the council and external investigators handling the corporate fraud attached to his front entities. He could no longer erase one version without contradicting the other. By sunset, the succession vote was dead. So was the old Shigemori structure. Kanda had lost. Kaito had kept his name. Zahara had found the truth. None of them had kept what they started with. As the servers began separating governance from legitimate operations, Zahara removed her certificate. Kaito's token lay unused beside it. For the first time since they met, neither of them needed the other to survive the next hour. That was exactly why whatever came next would have to be a choice. For the first few days, the damage looked administrative. Then, people began leaving. Not dramatically. No speeches, no shattered alliances in public. A senior captain in Osaka withdrew from the remaining Shigemori structure after learning that the debt authority he had relied on for years no longer existed. 2 affiliated companies separated their contracts from the organization. A logistics subsidiary requested independent management rather than accept a new succession framework. Kaito approved each separation. Arima watched him sign the 3rd document and finally said, "You understand, this is permanent." "Yes, you could still rebuild part of it." "No." That answer ended the argument. The old system had given Shigemori Kai efficiency leverage and a form of certainty. It had also allowed manipulated records to become law. Kaito was not going to rebuild the same weakness simply because he missed the power it gave him. Matsura's case moved through the council quickly after the founder's ledger became available. His status was fully restored on paper. He declined the invitation to return. Kaito called him once. Zahara was in the room when the connection opened. Matsura listened to the formal acknowledgement of error, then said, "You corrected the record. That is enough." Kaito accepted it. He did not offer more money, rank, or protection. When the call ended, Zahara said, "You thought he'd come back. I thought he might. And now I know correcting harm does not entitle me to the person harmed." She looked at him. That answer stayed with her longer than she expected. Kanda's end was quieter than the damage he had caused. The audit package connected his legal proxies to the manipulated governance history and to several front entities already under investigation for corporate fraud. His internal authority vanished almost immediately. His external legal problems moved more slowly. There was no execution, no private revenge, no body disappearing into Tokyo Bay. He lost what he had spent years constructing, the ability to define truth while standing outside the consequences of it. Zahara's reckoning proved harder. The evidence from Asterion cleared her of the central accusation. Internal correspondence proved that her removal from Nightingale had been planned before the final transfer. Her objections to unilateral authority were documented. The failures later attributed to her had been created after she was excluded. For the first time in 6 years, she could prove she had not destroyed the project. But vindication did not bring back her old life. Several firms contacted her within a week. 2 offered senior roles. One withdrew after learning how deeply Nightingale had been integrated into Shigemori Kai. Another asked whether she would be willing to sign a statement minimizing the criminal use of her architecture. She declined. The truth had returned her name. It had not restored her innocence. That distinction mattered. Kaito offered compensation for Shigemori's use of Nightingale. Zahara refused. You bought it from Asterion. We benefited from your work. It nearly cost your organization everything it had. That does not cancel the first point. She looked at the figure on the document. The number on the page could change her life. She slid it back. If I take that now, I'll spend the next 10 years wondering whether it was payment guilt or a leash. Kaito folded the document and put it away. Then I won't offer it again. 2 days later, he tried a different approach. Security. Zahara looked up from her laptop. For what for you? No. You've exposed people who will remember your name. The central threat is gone. That does not make the world harmless. She shut the laptop. What does your protection look like? He answered too quickly. Drivers, monitored access, vetted staff, secure residence. There it is. Kaito stopped. Protection in your world means access. Sometimes, access becomes oversight. Oversight becomes permission. One day, I find a choice made for me. It was done to protect me. Kaito considered that. He did not. Instead, he asked, what would protection look like to you? Being able to call you, without being managed by you. That was the answer neither of them had been ready for in Chapter 1. Kaito nodded once. Then, that is what I can offer. The next irreversible change came from him. He stepped away from direct operational control. He no longer sat above every conflict, not entirely from the Shigemori name, not from every obligation, but from the position that allowed one person to sit above every conflict. Arima took on a narrower operational role under a newly divided council. The legitimate maritime business was separated from the old governance structure and placed under independent audit. Kaito kept a minority stake. Less authority, more visibility. Zahara understood exactly what that cost him. You didn't have to do that for me, she said. I didn't. Good. I did it because I finally understood what Konda understood before I did. That whoever controls the structure eventually controls everyone inside it. Months earlier, that sentence would have sounded like strategy. Now it sounded like surrendering a weapon. Zahara established a cybersecurity resilience firm in Yokohama. Small at first, selective by design. Every contract required independent review and distributed authority. Those requirements were modeled on the original Nightingale principle. Kaito asked to invest. She laughed once. That is an impressive way to misunderstand the lesson. I expected that response. Then why ask? Because I am interested. In the company, in both. Zahara looked at him for a long moment. Then she drafted terms. No access to secure infrastructure. No unilateral override. No private influence over board decisions. No assumption that their relationship altered any of those rules. Kaito read every line, then signed. No negotiation. That was when she finally saw the difference between restraint and trust. Restraint was refusing to take control when it was inconvenient. Trust was accepting that control would never be offered. Zahara signed beneath him. Only then did she reach across the table and take his hand. There was no confession. They did not need one yet. The choice had already been made. Months later, Zahara worked late in the office above the warehouse. The secure network sat behind glass. Kaito waited outside with 2 coffees. He still did not have an access card. He had never asked for one. Near the stairwell, a pale mark remained where an old Shigemori crest had once been mounted. Neither of them had removed the stain. Neither had restored the symbol. Zahara locked the secure door, accepted the coffee, and walked downstairs beside him. Neither went first. Power could keep someone close. Trust was choosing not to close the door. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what you think really changed them.